Today on Counterpoint, Colonel Douglas MacGregor returns to discuss the impact of Charlie Kirk, regional wars, and the Trump-Putin two-step. I'm Eddie Hobbs. Let's get straight into it. Colonel MacGregor, you're very welcome back to Counterpoint. There's been an awful lot of water under the bridge in such a short period of time since we first spoke. That was on that was just 2 days before the US dropped those bombs on the nuclear facilities in Iran, and you had predicted that because we recorded that on a Friday, and we released it at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning over here, and that's why it got such a huge response. So your analysis was spot on, no surprise there to me. But I just want to start with this statement released 17 or 18 hours ago from this conversation by Donald Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organization. It seems to be very significant. So in connection with this statement, Colonel, this seems to be a remarkable move, obviously driven by an extraordinary event, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which was for those of us who are unused to this kind of seeing this kind of thing happen, it was really very shocking. Globally, it was such a huge event. What's your take on the response?
Well, I would say that most people realize that Charlie Kirk was not killed for what he said. He was killed because people all over the world were listening to him. And as a result, somebody somewhere decided that he presented a danger to the status quo. He had moved in a lot of his thinking further and further away from what we normally call the Israel lobby and its policies and thinking. And he came around to understanding that what is happening in Gaza is, in fact, an atrocity. I think he discovered that Epstein was a serious player in Washington, and that it was vital to release the files, even though it would expose many, many famous people. There needed to be an understanding that the Mossad, working probably with the CIA, had a lot of information about people they didn't want to release, and that this was being used for blackmail purposes. He also spoke directly to President Trump when he was up at a party in the Hamptons on Long Island about the wisdom of attacking Venezuela. And that, of course, offended Donald Trump. He suggested that probably wasn't a good idea and shouldn't be done. So I think if you look at his development over the last 6, 7, 8 years, he moved away from a very, I don't want to say naive, but innocent view of the world and the United States in it to one that was much more critical. And I think his statements were resonating very strongly with people under the age of 40 who listened to him and agreed with him. So somebody decided he had to be stopped.
And what happens now with the designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization? Will that spread internationally, and will it? And there's going to be an investigation into the funders of this organization or this network of organizations. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, let's first see what the investigation actually produces.
Okay.
We already know a great deal about the people that are funding it. They are very wealthy people in places like Los Angeles and New York City. They're also, interestingly enough, for the most part, strong Zionists, and they seem to be advocates for much of the warfare that's going on. So it's a strange combination. On the one hand, Antifa, which is almost a radical Bolshevik-like organization, almost, I would say, anarchistic in some of its thinking, seems to be strange that people supporting it would also be in the Zionist camp, but that appears to be the case. But we'll see. We don't know all the details, but certainly during 2020, we learned a lot about it. And many Europeans may not realize this, but Antifa caused at least $2 billion worth of damage during 2020 in the summer and early fall of that year during the election year. A number of people were killed, including policemen. Many of these were just innocent bystanders. A lot of people were injured. So this is by no means a moderate organization in any way, shape, or form. So I don't think that for us in the United States, its designation as a radical terrorist organization comes as a surprise. If anything, many of us are wondering why it didn't happen earlier.
Well, I mean, it's certainly going to shake things up. There's no doubt about that, because I can see how it's going to end at the geographical borders of the United States, given the fact that Antifa is an international organization, and if it's designated a terrorist organization, well, in my opinion, anyway, for what it's worth, and if this comes out from the investigation, which is the point you're making, heaven help people that are on the other side of that. I wouldn't like to have the power of the United States coming after me if I had been funding into this organization or been in any way near, what has happened. But just to press on, because, many other things have happened since the last time we spoke. I was very interested in a comment you made in a recent interview where you were suggesting that you believe that Israel will go back to war again very shortly with Iran. And I was just wondering why, what's in your mind in saying that, and what is the Israeli objective?
Well, you just hit the nail on the proverbial head. What is Israel's objective? And Israel cannot be the dominant power in the region as long as Iran remains intact and a viable force. Iran has emerged from this 12-day conflict much stronger for the experience. The assumption was at the time that the Israelis could balkanize Iran the way they have Syria. Remember, we supported the Israelis along with the British, especially British MI6, in its effort to destroy the Assad regime and create chaos in Syria. Well, we've got it. Part of Syria is under Kurdish control. Part of it is under Sunni Islamist control. Part of it on the coast is still controlled by the Russians and neighboring Alawites. And then the southern portion is under Israeli and Druze control. So that in many ways is the kind of picture that Israel would like to build all over the region. Israel feels safe when all the nations around it are weak and divided and incapable of governing themselves, frankly. They see that as a benefit strategically to Israel. Now, I'm saying Israel, I mean Mr. Netanyahu, obviously, and the Likudniks, the party that support him. He wants to do that to Iran. That has failed. And so the question is, can he realize all of his goals in the region, which involves territorial acquisition in Syria, potentially Jordan, southern Lebanon, as well as parts of Egypt? Can he do that and still survive with Iran standing in the way? Iran is kind of a colossus. Remember, Iran is the size of Western Europe. It has a very large population. They've turned out to be far more sophisticated and capable than the Israelis or we, in my judgment, ever gave them credit for being. So I think he has to, it's a kind of do or die moment, because right now he has complete control of the United States Congress and the White House. Everything that he does is really dependent upon our unconditional support. So as long as he's got that, I think he feels he's got to use it. So I think September, certainly October, latest would probably be December or November. But I rather thought by the end of September, beginning of October, we'd see some action. Now, how could that occur? Well, I would imagine a false flag is eminently possible, where something occurs that MI6 and Israel cooperate to facilitate, and then it's blamed on Iran. No doubt that is the CIA, would have a hand in that as well. I just have the feeling something like that will occur.
But I mean, Israel is geographically, quite a bit away from Iran. So this would be air power, some kind of air power strike again, or do you see something other developing?
Yeah, I think so. Air power, in other words, missile power as well.
Okay. Yeah.
But remember, the Israelis do have submarines. These are conventional diesel subs. The Germans built them and provided them to the Israelis free of charge. They do have nuclear warheads on cruise missiles that they can fire from those submarines. They already know that there has been tremendous progress in Iran with regard to air and missile defense. The Russians that initially offered to help the Iranians really didn't take up that offer, felt strongly they could do it on their own. Well, after the experience of the 12-day conflict, they turned back to Russia, and the Russians have provided an enormous amount of support with regard to integrated air defenses. I think the Russians have also made it clear that if the Israelis try to destroy Iran, in other words, to do to it what was done in Syria, that they will not stand by and allow that to happen. And for that matter, the Chinese have also made similar noises. So it's a very, very dangerous set of circumstances. The United States could stop all of it. President Trump could stop these things overnight. All he would have to do is say, I'm not sending any more support or assistance to the Israelis until they come to terms with a solution in Gaza and agreed to no further fighting with Iran or anyone else in the region. But I don't see much evidence that such a thing could happen. I think President Trump is 100% in their grip. So this is the time to act if you're Netanyahu. Waiting doesn't make any sense.
You mentioned Gaza, Colonel, and that's what we wanted to bring you next, because since last time we spoke, there's been substantial change here as well, where the Israeli government seem to be reinvading Gaza. For what objective?
Well, it's very clear the Israelis have not minced words. They want to either drive out or kill the population that lives in Gaza. They have wanted to do that for a long time now. They were restrained in the past for various reasons, but I think now that they have effectively unconditional support from Washington, from the Congress and from the president, they want to exploit it before they lose it. There's always the danger that public opinion in the United States could turn against them. I think increasingly it's already begun to do that. But there are so many people that have been paid handsomely for their support of Israel in the past right now holding office. I don't think that's going to change very, very soon. But nevertheless, I think Mr. Netanyahu wants to proceed with this. And, of course, the West Bank is also on the agenda. If you cannot be successful in doing this in Gaza, then you can't proceed to the West Bank. And if you look at the Greater Israel Project, as it's outlined on the map, it includes Egypt across the Sinai to the Nile River Valley and a little bit beyond, southern Syria, southern Lebanon, parts of Jordan, and potentially, at some point, even parts of Saudi Arabia. So, this is something that has to be accomplished sooner rather than later, because, again, if you lose the unconditional support of the United States halfway through this thing, the whole game is up.
And in terms of forces in the area, it would appear that Turkey is the only real military, pretty strong military power if it chose to get involved. Is that a risk in a situation like this?
Saudi Arabia?
No, Turkey.
Oh, Turkey.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Turks have a very good army, and they can mobilize a couple of million men in the space of 40, 60 days. So they are in a position to absolutely defeat the Israelis on the ground. Obviously, the Israelis also make it clear that they do have nuclear weapons. They don't say it publicly, but they imply it frequently. In fact, Mr. Erdogan said on numerous occasions, we know what you have and we're not afraid of you. But I think he actually is, because Turkey's economy is very fragile. They're investing heavily in their infrastructure, so they are reluctant to put all of that at risk. And again, everything hinges on the United States. Israel has right now the unconditional support of the United States. That means its armed forces and its economy, because we are compensating for the damage done to the Israeli economy. If it were not for us and tremendous infusions of cash, the Israeli economy would have collapsed a long time ago and everyone would be emigrating. I'm talking about the Israelis themselves. So you put that picture together, he's got to act sooner rather than later, which is why I thought that something again would happen with Iran in late September, early October, latest, obviously, December.
Yeah, can I ask you then, just next, again, since last time we spoke, I call it the Trump-Putin two-step in the introduction. They meet in Alaska. It looked like a lot of theatre. There didn't seem to be much progress. Or, in your opinion, is this the first step towards the end of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict? I mean, how do you read it?
Well, in a strange sort of way, I think the conflict is on the road to a conclusion. There's no question about that. The war on the battlefield is largely over. The Ukrainians are defeated. They've lost somewhere between 1.7, 1.8 million Ukrainians in uniform. There are only people that are totally delusional or simply want to lie their way out of this business won't admit that. We do still have people in Washington, and unfortunately, I think President Trump is listening to them because he repeats the same nonsense, who insists that the Russians have lost 1 million dead, and that's not right. The Russians have lost about 120,000, perhaps another 100,000 or more are wounded. But the difference is that those who were wounded will never return to duty in Ukraine. Ukrainians don't have a developed medical infrastructure and evacuation system. The Russians do. They've saved most of the lives of the wounded, and most of them have been able to return to active service. In addition, of course, Russian manpower continues to increase. They're bringing in roughly 35,000 men a month. And the war is actually as popular as a war can be. It is certainly widely supported in Russia. People are willing to fight for their country. The opposite is the case in Ukraine. Anyone who can do so is avoiding service and wants to get out of the country. No one wants to be sent to the front right now because that's viewed widely in Ukraine as a death sentence. So I think it is winding down. However, the regime is dedicated to maintaining the facade that there is still some hope, and their supporters, their globalist governmental supporters in Great Britain, France, and Germany, obviously, are sticking with the lies and arguing that there is still hope, and they are talking about some very foolish things. I think they've given up on the use of any forces on the ground because, quite frankly, the British Army is a shadow of its former self. If they were lucky, they could get maybe 20,000 men on the ground in Ukraine. The French can't do much better. The Germans, I don't know what kind of an army they've actually got, if any at all. And in Germany's case, the army is being seriously denationalized. Anyone who expresses any view that could be called German nationalism is on his way out of uniform. And of course, Eddie, all of us who serve in our respective armed forces, whether it's Irish or British or German or French, we're all nationalists. Why else would we be in uniform if we didn't love our country and we weren't willing to defend it? So that's a very stupid approach, but the Germans are still suffering from the what I call the 80-year apology tour, which really needs to end. So I don't see anything happening on the ground, and clearly I think Mr. Trump has made it known to everybody who wants to listen to it on more than one occasion. He's not going to send any U.S. Army troops into Ukraine. So my own view is he ought to get them out of Europe. I mean, if they're not going to do anything, and I don't think they will, we need them back here in the United States. We've got our own problems. We don't need to spend the extra money. I think he believes that, but he's afraid to say it publicly. At the same time, the NATO allies are talking about a no-fly zone, which I think is an invitation to disaster. They recognize that the Russians do not usually fly a lot of manned aircraft through Ukrainian airspace. They rely more heavily on missiles and standoff attack strike systems. And they are more than adequate to deal with the problem. But they also have a very formidable integrated air defense system. And anybody who enters Ukrainian airspace, that is from NATO, will be picked up almost immediately. As soon as it crosses the line into Ukraine, it'll be targeted and ultimately shot down. Now, perhaps the globalist governments who are on their last legs in Paris, London, and Berlin want that as a means of somehow or another justifying themselves or staying in power. I don't think it'll work. And I think people in Washington don't care to be dragged into this on an involuntary basis. It's one thing to put up a brave front and pretend that you're doing something noble by supporting this corrupt regime in Kiev, but it's quite another when you actually have skin in the game. And the people that have been sending money over there, a lot of that money has ended up in their pockets anyway through various means. They don't have skin in the game, and I don't think they want to put any in.
Do you think then that is Putin playing, Napoleon, I see him over your shoulder there, Napoleon's maxim about never interrupt an enemy making a mistake? I think that came from the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, and I know you love your history, where he weakened his right flank, and the Austrian-Russian army attacked, swung around to the right, weakened their centre, and then he just took the Praslin Heights, which is extraordinary battle plan. Putin seems to be, I'm putting it as a question, is Putin, slowing things down, etc., because he can see that Europe itself is moving much more towards nationalism, away from globalism. You see the shift in Germany, you see the shift in France, you see it in Holland, you see it in Austria, you see it in Italy, and hopefully someday it will happen in Ireland. Do you think that's part of the reason why he has been slow to seriously engage in peace discussions? And that's the first part. The second part of that question is, if there is a peace agreement, what does demilitarized Ukraine look like?
Well, let's take this apart and try to make sense out of the whole thing. First of all, contrary to what people have been saying, the globalists, Putin has never been interested in ruling all of Ukraine. He didn't want to conquer it, and he doesn't want to rule it. He is very interested in liberating the Russians that have lived under an oppressive regime, and he's done that. He's interested in controlling the territory that he thinks is strategically vital to Russia's long-term security interests. He's already got most of that, and I think he'll consolidate his gains in the near future. I think ultimately Odessa will fall under Russian control as well. Odessa was never a Ukrainian city. It was always a Russian-speaking city. So I think that will happen. I'd be surprised if Kharkov doesn't also end up under permanent Russian control. But much beyond that, the last thing that he wants to do is have to govern and administer territory that is historically, culturally, ethnically, linguistically hardcore Ukrainian. And the Ukrainians in the West in particular, once you approach the Polish border, those people are fiercely nationalistic. They want nothing to do with the Russians. He knows that. What he would like to see happen there is that the part of Ukraine beyond the Dnieper River that remains free of any Russian presence is simply neutral. And he would like something on the model of Austrian neutrality, which has worked very well, by the way, worked extremely well for the Germans. In fact, Austria's standard of living has finally surpassed Germany's standard of living. And the Austrians have in no way, shape, or form suffered under this Neutrality Act. On the other hand, they've really profited. I think the Ukrainians would profit more from neutrality by being a bridge between the two. But the point is that Putin's not interested in a major war. Now, the other point that everyone overlooks, why is Putin staying where he is? Why is he not moving faster? Why does he only control the areas that are historically Russian? Well, I gave you part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that he doesn't want a war with the United States. He knows how impulsive Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump is the sort of person who can be moved emotionally very easily. If he were to say to the general staff, I want you to seize Kiev by the end of September, could they do it? Absolutely, they could do it. But in his mind, that would not be beneficial because it might create the illusion that he wants to defeat, that he's interested in controlling everything in Ukraine. He's not, never was. And if something like that were to happen, I think what Mr. Putin would say is, how do I stop people from besieging Donald Trump in Washington and telling him that the juggernaut is headed for the rest of Europe and we have to intervene to save Europe and all this kind of nonsense. And Trump can be manipulated emotionally. We saw that in his first term when he lobbed missiles into the desert in Syria on 2 occasions on the basis of what was a false flag. There were no children dying of sarin gas or anything else. It was all nonsense. It was all MI6 fabricated, but it worked. Phony pictures of a dead baby and other things were put in front of Trump, and he said, "Oh, we have to act." Most of it was all nonsense. But the problem is, if you know the personality of the opponent, and I think Mr. Putin understands Donald Trump, why would you offer red meat like that to your enemies in Washington or Brussels? So I think he's going to continue to do what you see him doing now. He's going to move deliberately, systematically. He's going to consolidate control over what he takes. And he's also watching carefully what you mentioned, which is the very probable turnover in government. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you watched it, Eddie, but I watched the population in London. the hundreds of thousands of people that showed up with British flags and the cross of St. George. Now, I'm not an Englishman, but I was moved by that, and I was heartened by that. The thing I do not understand is this globalist passion for the destruction of the European peoples by ruining them, by bringing in millions of foreigners they did not ask for, people that can never assimilate, people who are radically different from them, and people who have no use for them. They don't even feel a shred of admiration for the achievements of the European peoples over many centuries. So I was encouraged by that, and I hope to see more of that. I'm told that something like 800,000 Frenchmen are expected to rise up in Paris in the near future. I certainly hope so. Again, France is one of the cornerstones of Western civilization. Do I want to see that overrun and become a part of North Africa and the Middle East? I don't think so. I think it has value. This is the other thing. For some reason, the globalists have taken over the education systems and convinced people in Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, France, Germany, Spain, that they themselves, people of these countries, have no real value. That they have something to apologize for. Well, none of us is responsible for what our ancestors did 100 years ago. None of us is responsible for the people our ancestors slept with. The only thing we're responsible for is what we do. But we all have a legacy. We all have inherited this great trust from the past, and we want to preserve it, or we should. And I hope that that's the case in Ireland as well as it is in Britain and France and Germany. I think Putin understands that this is now moving positively in the right direction for Europe, and he knows that the nationalists in these countries are not radical in their views of the rest of the world. They're not interested in marching into Russia. They're not interested in fighting anybody anywhere. They want to fight for their country at home. I think he knows that. So if you put all of those things together, I think you can understand why he's doing what he's doing.
I find that analysis very compelling. I just wanted to ask you one last question, Colonel. You made a very interesting statement very recently about history's wheels turning, about basically the twilight of the great European dominance and something else beginning to replace it. Can you just walk us through that?
Well, if you look at history as a cyclical exercise, you have the rise, and then after you rise, you peak, and then you begin to fall. But inevitably, there is a tendency to rise again. I think at the moment, for reasons that have a lot to do with ourselves, with our own policies, particularly in the United States, we are on a downswing right now. We shipped our own manufacturing base overseas. The Chinese did not come across to the United States, grab us by the throat, and say, "Give us your manufacturing base." No, we were eager to send it over there because the wealthier classes, what I call the CEO and shareholder classes, saw an opportunity to dramatically increase their wealth by selling out the working class, selling out the middle class, making it impossible for families that 30, 40 years ago could earn a very good living, could own a car or two, a house, send their children to school, put food on the table, to now people that are on the edge of poverty, that are having trouble making car payments, that are looking at rising gas prices and wondering if they can buy enough gas so that they can take the car to work. People that once had very good paying jobs that now have very poorly paid jobs. I mean, this is not new. This has been going on for some time, but we let this happen to ourselves. And then on top of this, we have this massive wave of immigration. We have an estimated 50 million people living inside our borders who are not Americans, who were not born in the United States. And people say, well, immigration is such a good thing. Well, between 1920 and 1970, we had almost no immigration. And that was the biggest period of our economic expansion, during which we were more productive than we'd ever been in our history. We shut down immigration in 1924. It did not reopen until after the Second World War. And then it was modest because we had quotas for people. We were interested in maintaining the stability of our society. It's a balance of who was here, where they came from, and how they would contribute. We threw all of that out of the window over the last 30 years. And now we have a serious problem on our hands. And I think we're going to have serious conflict inside our country, similar to what you see happening in Britain and France and elsewhere. We're just a little bit behind. We're also a larger country, and it takes longer for things to happen. So we've got challenges ahead. We've got to deal with this illegal alien problem. We've got to enforce our laws. We have not been enforcing our laws. We haven't guarded our borders. We've begun to do that now. But we also have a problem with our ports and airports, our harbors and so forth. We have a huge problem with an overseas military presence that is not needed anymore. Technology has changed. Things which were once an American monopoly are increasingly widely disseminated across the globe to many middle grade countries. When I say middle grade, I'd say middle-sized powers. You don't have to be a superpower in order to enjoy the advantages of precision. And you can build weapons today more cheaply and faster than you could in the past because we're now talking about rockets and missiles as opposed to hard-shell ammunition. I guess the point is we have a military establishment that is many years behind where it needs to be. We need a complete overhaul, reorganization of the way we build military power. We need a new national military strategy that is focused on our country and the Western Hemisphere. Having said that, there's still no need to invade Venezuela. Venezuela's role in the drug trade is minimal. It's a fraction of the larger problem. Venezuela is in poverty. It has the largest oil and gas reserves in the world, I'm told. But those reserves are deep. That requires deep drilling. The United States has the best technology and technicians for that purpose. Instead of threatening the place, we should do business with the government, whether we like it or not, and look at what we can do in order to replenish that industrial base and do business with them. You know, right now what we're doing is that we're threatening a Latin American state who is going to look for support wherever it can get it. That means it'll go to Russia, it'll go to China, it'll go to Iran or North Korea, anywhere, to anybody who will sell them things with which they can defend themselves. That's counterproductive for us and for them. We need a different approach, but we have bullied for so long, so many people. I think it's a habit we don't know how to get out of it. And I think President Trump, who I think should know better, is beguiled by being the big military power in the area and is looking for an opportunity to flex his muscles. It's not necessary. We Americans are not greater, or we do not become greater by bombing other people. But I think a lot of people have gotten confused over the last 30 years because, let's face it, Eddie, war has always been something that happened on somebody else's soil. And the problem today is, given the new technologies of warfare, we're not going to enjoy that kind of immunity much longer. Mm-hmm. War will find us on the North American continent, which is why it's so important to take a different path.
And how do you see, final question, how do you see these spheres of influence developing? Because you have India coming up fast, China, we know a lot about China, Brazil is there, and then there's the other, what you call middle power countries as well. And, you've got a de-dollarization trend. How do you see it working out? Is it too complicated at this stage to know?
No, I don't think it's too complicated. I think we can see in India a very clear example. President Trump and his team have said, if you trade with Russia in oil and gas, we're going to punish you. He sounds like Joe Biden now. Biden said, we're going to break Russia. We're going to bring it down. We're going to rumble the ruble and all this kind of nonsense. He didn't talk in those terms. He talked very differently. Now he's in office. He's repeating the same stupidity. Russia is not going to be brought down by sanctions of any kind. They have long since immunized themselves against that. So has China. China has new supply chains that don't require us. If anything, we're being cut out of much of that, which is very bad for the United States. Mm. But he threatened India, and he said, look, I'm going to impose a 50% tariff unless you refuse to trade with Russia. Well, that doesn't make any sense. First of all, they need the oil and gas. Washington, as President of the United States, said on more than one occasion, no nation state can be expected to move beyond the limits of its own interests. We've forgotten that. We have to understand that others have to live. And India has had a long-term relationship that was very good with Russia. By the way, they've had a very good relationship with us. They have actually picked up the slack, as we say, in the Indian Ocean against the Somali pirates. They have worked with us. We've had more joint exercises with the Indian Armed Forces than almost anybody else in the world. There's no reason for any hostility to exist between us and India. What we need to acknowledge is that India has interests, just as we need to acknowledge Russia's interests, China's interests, Japan's interests. If we do that, I don't necessarily think that you end up with a frozen set of spheres of influence. You're simply recognizing the needs of other countries for security.
Well, we'll see how it evolves in the times to come. Colonel, I want to thank you for coming back on Counterpoint. We covered a lot of ground there in a very short period of time, as usual, with very clear analysis and very honest answers to questions, difficult questions, as far as I was concerned. So I want to thank you for that. And I can tell you that following our first interview, that you've built up quite a following here in amongst the Irish audience, and I expect this will add to it. So thank you so much for that, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Well, thanks for bringing me on, and God bless everybody in Ireland.
Thank you. So listen, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, hit the buttons below, and if you like this content and that kind of clear analysis, please send it to your friends and tell more people about Counterpoint. Thank you very much, and goodbye.